There's one guy who's caught sleeping security guards, people stealing gas, bad T&E, and building robots. That guy is Adam Habberley, and he's on Office Hours today.
This is Office Hours,
The show for sharing experiences and stories in governance, risk management, and compliance. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. Today we have invited one of my good friends, Adam Habberley, a member of the ACL team here, who is not only one of our most important consultants because he takes on our biggest client challenges. No pressure, Adam. He's also quite a famous video gamer, among other things.
Very true.
Very true. So basically what we're going to do is share some stories from the field today in Adam's experience. So, Adam, where would you like to start sharing your experiences in GRC?
All right. Well, so I've been with ACL for 8 years, and at ACL in the last couple of years, I'm considered the Roadwarrior. I'm always on the road. In fact,
I actually consider you an ACL OG because you're one of the few people that's been here longer than me.
I know, right? and more than Lori as well.
Yeah, that's right.
By 6 months. I go on site with a lot of customers. I see all these unique experiences with customers when I'm on site, or even with remote activities as well. And there's always some stories that kind of stand out. I was working with a customer. It was my third project ever. Third
project ever. So we're already getting 8 years of experience condensed to 15 minutes.
Yes, exactly. So my third project ever was working with a customer in the Boston area that has warehouses and storage facilities for data security and physical and data storage and things like that. So this customer started off with a project very generic. It was your AP, T&E, P card, and once we built that project, we started getting into some really interesting things. And they have facilities all over North America and as well, it's a worldwide organization. Yeah. So we wanted to focus on warehouses for their storage in the U.S. first. And what we were trying to identify was timing of accessing the warehouse and punching in for the day. That was where we started, really little stuff. And then we realized that our data analytics could be used to identify when a security guard is not doing their rounds at night. Yeah. So someone would start their shift, they would punch into the building to do their rounds, and then 6 hours later they would punch back in to do their rounds again. And there was a large gap because a security guard that is on a 24-hour surveillance of those warehouses should be, of course, doing their rounds. They should be. And what happened was they investigated some security guards and they found them asleep during their shift. And I would have never thought that our tool could be used to capture that. It was almost an indirect method because we were doing access, how frequently they were accessing the building from a normal shift perspective. Right. And then we kind of just looked at it the other way and we said, what's the time delay of accessing the building, and we applied it for the night shift.
This is really interesting, right? Because there's lots of companies, and to be clear, when you say doing a project, in particular, your where you get involved in these projects with clients is helping them build data analysis to evaluate and monitor some of these types of risks.
Yes.
And what's interesting here is you started on typical sorts of things you see auditors, compliance people start on, which is how are we handling payments, how are we doing these sorts of things. But now here's this, lots of companies have physical important assets.
Yes.
That need to be safeguarded, and typically you consider that physical access sort of a something that has to be seen or monitored with video or whatever, and yet you're able to use data to look at this particular scenario.
Correct, and we use the data to make a decision on where the problem areas would lie and what times and people that it would impact on, because we got down to that granularity. So it was a great indirect way of getting there that we had never intended on going to before.
So I had an interesting one like this a number of years back. I actually was involved with a company that physical security of the on-site server room was a big deal.
Okay.
And looking at just the badge reader on the server room, everything looked fine. But we found, for a number of reasons, it seemed like somebody had been in there. And ultimately, believe it or not, what we actually found out was one of the cleaning staff had thought they were doing the company a favor because that room was locked and they couldn't get in there. They were actually going in the storage closet next door and using a ladder to go over the top of the wall through the suspended ceiling to go in there and clean. Like they were really going above and beyond their job to get in this extra room and clean.
Wow.
But in effect, breaching physical security. So in your case, with this sort of, there's security guards, there's folks sleeping on the job. What in the data showed that? Or what could you actually look at to identify that?
Yeah, so it would help to identify, there would be false positives related to that data set, but we looked at timing of when they did their rounds. So they would punch in for their night shift at, let's say, 11 o'clock at night, and they wrap up at 7 in the morning when normal day staff would go in and do inventory and things like that. So between 11 and 7 a.m., we're like, okay, well, they punched in here, they accessed the building, so we looked at the physical, the panel access,
whatever it is,
panel access event of being 11 o'clock, and then we would see them panel access out of the building at, let's say, 15, 20 minutes later after they did their rounds, and then there'd be a huge gap between 11:20 and 5:30 in the morning. Just nothing would happen. They did, either they were constantly walking around the building, which, sure, that is doing the rounds, but they never went into the building at all, which is part of their job to do that and make sure that
effectively the control's not working.
Yeah.
Super interesting story. So that showed up primarily through the badge reader.
Correct.
In our particular case, in my example, the rule was everybody had to not only badge at the door, but then if there were visitors, they had to sign an electronic visitor log. And effectively, what was seen was there were door openings coming out. In this case, the server room captured when the door opened and somebody went out. That obviously didn't correspond. Well, actually, what happened was there was people going out and no matching visitor log was what, for whatever reason, uncovered this. And then we found not only was there no corresponding visitor log, there actually wasn't anybody badging in yet going out the door. And so same sort of thing. Here's a very physical event that turns out there's, call it sensor data and today's buzzwords, to evaluate to see that pattern of behavior.
Yep, of course.
Great story. You have another for us.
I do. Same customer.
Okay, fantastic.
Same customer. Another area that we started to look at is because they had warehouses, they need to transport the goods from one warehouse to another or from their customers to the secured facilities. So they had a fleet of vehicles. And when we talk about fleet of vehicles, fuel is always involved. And they leveraged
Big warehousing company. Now there's trucks that get stuff to this warehouse, of course.
You got it.
Fuel
involved. And with the cost of fuel right now, or I guess starting however many years ago, it is a concern for everybody, even if you're a truck driver, I guess. So they had a fuel card vendor that was Right Express, and that the data set there, we were able to identify close succession transactions where you have somebody who's fueling up and then fueling up an hour later, which is weird. There's no way you can blow that much fuel. If you are fueling up in excess of your tank, if you're fueling up with the different fuel types, so you're a gasoline, you put diesel in, what's going on. So there was some interesting analytics that we came out of that. We found so many problems with one gas station that my customer decided to go on a stakeout. So he went on a stakeout and waited for
And your customer was that was somebody who was in an audit role, compliance,
investigation role.
Investigation.
Yes.
Role. Okay, cool.
So he went
Damn, I want an investigation role so I can go on stakeouts.
So he waited, and he knew what time that these activities were happening.
Mm-hmm.
So he went around an hour around the time when they were happening, waited for a company vehicle to roll up, and he noted the license plate of the vehicle or whatever the company number would be associated with that. And he saw the activity that was happening, and the result of this was fueling up in excess of your tank size. So the driver would fuel up, hold the gas nozzle. A friend would come behind him. He'd put it right back in, fill that one up, hold it. Next car would come in, and he monitored behavior. And needless to say, that driver is no longer employed.
Yeah. So interestingly enough, we actually didn't talk about this at all ahead of time. I have a similar parallel story to that because I used to work for a lot of mining companies when I was still in practice, and we had a similar scenario where we would find. In our case, what we found is on a particular, one particular mine site, but not all of the others, there was an inordinate amount of fuel that went out on Friday afternoons. And it was a data accident that we looked into this and saw that one mine site out of 10 had all this, because they had fuel right at the site. So that fuel went out on Friday afternoons. And so, long story short, what turned out after we looked into it was they actually thought they were doing the right thing, but everybody was filling their... multiple people at the site were filling up their personal car on the way out of work on Friday afternoons because they had actually, for a number of miscommunication reasons, had... a number of miscommunications had led them to believe that it was a standard employee benefit that you got to gas your car on Friday afternoons before the weekend.
Wow.
On this one particular mine site. So obviously that got corrected. But in that case, it turned out to be a couple of $100,000, not the end of the world, but still a couple $100,000 of fuel that had been sort of vanishing over the course of the past 2 years on Friday afternoons.
Interesting. I'm going to be implementing something similar for another customer of mine that it's a municipality, and they have a on-site fueling depot for their police force and for their fire trucks as well, and they want to monitor that process.
So 2 good stories in a row why to be thinking about. There's lots of talk about the Internet of Things, and here auditors, risk professionals have been using kind of quote-unquote sensor data for a long time to think about how can we evaluate these patterns.
Yep.
That's really interesting. Okay, I'm tired of that client, Adam. Tell me about somebody else.
Okay, so maybe on a little bit more of the practicality side of things. So customers with our software, so ACL has their own language, formerly known as Audit Command Language, now our company name. So the Audit Command Language is supposed to be streamlined for anybody to use. It's not your Java, it's not your C++ or Visual Basic. It's supposed to be streamlined. So picking up and scripting is simpler than other languages. And as I have a computer science background, I can attest to that. One of our customers, a lot of them, what they do is they self-learn, and they build these processes themselves. And they build it on the version of which they purchase, and then it just works for years and years and years, and they just upgrade the version and they carry over because we are completely reverse compatible. So they keep going, but the functionality that existed 8 years ago when I first started has been far improved since then. Right. New functionalities, new ways of doing fuzzy logic with our awesome dice coefficient versus other methods. I'm a huge dice coefficient fanboy.
Yeah, you're nerdy enough to be in a dice coefficient. Yeah.
So this customer built this huge process for analyzing insurance claims. So this is a California-based insurance claim hub, so to speak. And they built this process, and it was my project. My initial engagement was to enable the team about the new versions and new functionality and things like that. And on the very last day of the enablement, I said, walk me through what you have built already in-house. And I got walked through the process by somebody who had just retired last year. So nobody had any insight into what had been built.
Yeah.
It was built years ago, and they walked me through it, and they had a lot of, I need to move this file from here, and then that makes this file. I have to put that file here just to get that to run. And I said, all right, well, I'm going to come back, and I'm going to modernize this for you. Modernization is a new buzzword I've been using in the last year.
Yeah, and I take that buzzword one step further to say you should have a robot that does all the things that you just said. But I think what you said is very salient in the sense of what tends to happen, and a reason a lot of GRC professionals and teams fall back to manually looking at stuff is because exactly what you just described happens, where you have somebody who's able to build these things in an automation and data-driven way, but one day if they disappear, everybody's just letting it run and nobody knows how to move it forward.
Yep.
Yeah.
So there's more likeliness to revert. It was very interesting that you kind of provided that example. With this exact customer was the first time I used the analogy that ACL is a diet, and falling back on those manual processes is cheating on your diet. So it's hard to stay on your diet, but if you're there, it's healthy for you. Mm-hmm. And if you cheat on it, you're only damaging yourself by going back because you're regressing.
Yeah, well said.
And if you lose that champion, that power user, well, that could have been the coach that was just like, no, slaps the pizza out of your hand and feeds you the salad.
And needless to say, there's much more sustainable ways to build a program than this one power user. But
exactly.
Nonetheless, sounds like you moved them forward.
We sat in a room for 3 days, the customer and I. We completely reverse engineered their originally built process. And it wasn't just a more efficient process. The new users that were learning it understood the structure of the data that we were putting into place. And so they knew the documented steps that we were taking. It wasn't just here it works, click the button. They understood the underlying structure of how everything was going so that they could perform that internal knowledge transfer for the next champion that comes down the road.
Very cool. So much more sustainable. So in this case, what did you were talking about move the file around, move this around. What was actually happening? What was the risk or the test?
Oh man. Well, it was sometimes what happens with you being self-learned is you go brute force method. And brute force method is doing the same thing repeated times over and over again, and you will get to the correct answer. And I say that there's 10 different ways of doing the same thing in ACL. Yeah. None of them are wrong. They are just less correct than the best method of doing it. So this was a brute force method where they had one process that outputted an Excel file. And they needed to put that Excel file into a share drive. And then they need to run another process that imported that file that they had just done, which outputted another Excel file that they pulled out over here. And then they just kept doing this back and forth.
But it sounds like some kind of reconciliation or something. Was this like payments or was it T&E?
Claims related data.
Claims. Okay.
So what they were doing is they were
they
were generating their base data set, but they didn't know that you could point to that data set in our Analytics Exchange product. Mm-hmm. They didn't know that you could do that, so they moved it to another location where the analytic was running.
But what they were actually doing, what were they looking for in these claims, or what were they?
They were doing some very simplistic tests, but with insurance, building the import and preparation processes can be huge.
Yeah,
and we're talking about 8 tables deep just to get the data. But so they were doing duplicates or claims over a specific threshold for approval reviews.
Okay, perfect. Because I see this all the time in insurance companies. This agent or this branch or whatever, they all kind of enter data in the system differently, or you just get this sort of dirty data. Or insurance company acquires 3 other insurance companies. All these sorts of things to where if I want to find, hey, Adam submitted his car wreck, got paid on his car 3 different times through 3 different insurance companies, but they all happen to be subsidiaries I own.
Yep.
How do I ever figure that out? And so ultimately, you were, in some form, standardizing, built this program to standardize that data in a way where you could look for that.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So great story. We're gonna go fast on the. We're gonna go fast towards the end here, Adam.
All right.
Because you're a busy guy and you got planes to catch and go see other customers.
Yep.
We've talked about physical security. We've talked about insurance claims
And fuel cards. So we're gonna dial it back a little bit to a more straightforward business process area. I want to say that's kind of universal, which is travel and entertainment. I went on site to Indianapolis for a customer there that had T&E, right? And what they had never done before was aggregate all their data across all of the years that they had been doing T&E. All of their review was done in Excel. They had no data analysis tools whatsoever, and ACL was their first choice to aggregate this data set together and then perform some analysis to get some quick wins. So we built this process together where we took 3 years of their data set from Excel, extracts, merge it into one big table because ACL don't have a cap on number of records, and merge it together. And I just went to this one field called the line amount, and I sorted it on descending. That is all I did. Once the data
Very
was
complicated.
Yes, extremely difficult.
You probably had to read my book here on thoughtful machine learning to figure out how to do that analytic.
Yep. It was very complicated. So I sorted on descending amount, and the very first record that popped up at the top here, and I looked at it, and it was line level transaction, not expense report level transaction here, Dan. $14,921. It was a cash expense, meaning it wasn't through a corporate card program. It was self-approved by the individual, so somehow he was able to be his own approver. He was no longer employed with the company. He had not been there for 6 months. It was incurred on a weekend, which is another type of analysis that we perform, and the word gift was found inside the description.
That is like not the 3-strike hero. That's like the 6-strike hero.
Yes. and that is my taxi.
Oh.
Okay, I'll be right down.
All right. Thanks, Adam. Goodbye, Adam. Well done, pal. Thanks.